Welcome to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where host Alan Peterson interviews mystery and thriller writers from around the world. A thriller author himself, Alan brings listeners engaging conversations with everyone from best-selling legends like Lee Child, Walter Mosley, Frida McFadden, and Dean Koontz to exciting new voices in the thriller and mystery genre. For show notes, archives, and more, visit thrillerauthors.com, where you can also check out Alan's own thriller novels and join the Thrilling Reads newsletter. And don't forget to rate and review Meet the Thriller Author on your favorite podcast platform, especially Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And now let's dive in. The latest episode starts right now.
Hey everybody, this is Alan Peterson with Meet the Thriller Author. Today's guest on the podcast is Traci Hunter Abramson, former CIA officer, high school swimming coach, and award-winning author of more than 45 best-selling novels. Her newest thriller, Victim Number 8, will be released on October 7th. Traci, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So thanks so much for coming on. And so you've had such a fantastic journey in going from the CIA to teaching in high school to now writing all these novels. Can you tell us just a little bit about for people who aren't familiar with you and your background, can you tell us a little bit about your journey from that to this?
And I was recruited by the CIA out of college. And even though I always wanted to be a writer, it was one of those things where nobody does this for a real living. And so, of course, I graduated out of college with a degree in finance and international business, which is what brought me to the CIA's attention. I started writing for fun at the end of college. And then after 6 years with the agency, I left to raise my family and started coaching swimming and started writing. And I've just been kind of going solid in both ever since. I've actually just left the coaching world, but I think the writing part, even though I've been doing it since I left the agency, it took me like 6-7 years to get the first book published. So it sounds smooth, but it really wasn't. There's a lot of rocky roads in there.
Yeah, that's what I've noticed doing this podcast over the years. Even the overnight sensations really aren't overnight sensations.
No, never.
Interesting. When I saw, when I was doing research in your background, was that you studied abroad in Venezuela. That really caught my attention because I lived in Venezuela for 9 years when I was a child.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so there's an interesting connection there. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And has that that type of background helped you with your writing career?
Oh my gosh, it's helped so much. I think living abroad always is helpful just because you understand culture so much better. But yeah, I went as a foreign exchange student during a summer between my junior and senior years of high school. And I lived in Caracas, and this was back when it was a safe place to be. Venezuela and Colombia kind of had a role reversal. Back then, Colombia was a place you would never want to go. And in fact, I was almost deported a couple of times, once to Brazil and once to Colombia because of my accent. They couldn't tell. They knew I wasn't native to Venezuela, but they couldn't tell that I wasn't a native speaker. And so they kind of got confused a little bit a couple of times. But then, yeah, we spent our weekends in Higuerote. So, which is great beaches. And of course you have everyone has a boat and you just go out on the water and you can see, 20 feet down and don't need a snorkel or anything. And anyway, it was an amazing experience. Venezuela to me at the time was kind of like Kansas. It was like the middle of the Latino world. And so your accent was easy. Mm-hmm. Everyone can understand you. I still can't understand people from Argentina, but that's okay.
No, nobody can.
Exactly. That in Puerto Rico.
Yeah. Yeah, that was so funny. Yeah, because same thing whenever people find out that I live there, they're like, give me this look. I'm like, well, that was in the 70s. It's a little different nowadays.
Yeah. I was there in the 80s. So
funny, small world.
Definitely.
So you do draw back on those in your international background. I know you've traveled all over the world. What about like you're working for the CIA? Is that something? Since you always wanted to be a writer, when you were even there, you were like, oh, I wonder if I could get some good writing ideas in the future from here.
I don't think it was present in my mind at that time. I mean, you're just going from one crisis to another, quite honestly. It's working in the agency tends to be a lot of boring, but a lot of high stress at the same time. But now that when I started really writing, I couldn't believe how many things kind of came forward. But the funny thing is, every single time for probably my first 5 books, everything I put in that had any roots in reality, I was told by my editor that it wasn't realistic enough and I needed to change it. And so what happens in the real world and what happens in fiction, real world really is stranger.
Yeah, so interesting. It is a delicate balance, right? You want to
Yeah.
realism, but you need to entertain. So that's something
Yeah.
that's in your mind when you're writing these. And
Yeah. I mean, and I think it's that balance, both, it's the plausibility. You're taking pieces of reality and then making it where people would believe that it's real and having to change it, to make that aspect work.
so we're now victim number 8. So that's the second book in the Luke Steele series.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about that? Like what inspired the series, the character, and any differences from writing the first one to the second one?
So, I mean, the main character, Luke Steele, he's a military aide for the president. So he's a Marine Corps captain. And I had a friend, I live near Quantico Marine Base, so in Virginia. And one of my friends who was assigned there at the time ended up being the military aide. So he had that exact position. So seeing him go through that journey of those couple of years working for the president, he was in the end of Obama's term and beginning of Trump's first term. And, just being able to go into the White House in the different areas that the public can't go to was really helpful for me. And then the other main character, Amberlynn Reiner, is an FBI behavioral analyst. So that was one of those I had fun with. I met up with some people in the FBI up in New York at Thriller Fest a couple of years ago. And they just happened to have somebody talking on that. And I was like, oh my gosh, I worked with them when I was with the agency, but it was seeing that different aspect of them talking about it was really helpful. And as for the journey between the 2 books, I think that the second one was a little bit harder to write because, the first one, I just had to get the story down. I had one of the premises in there had been in my head for 20 years. And so I just had to make it work. This one, I was like, okay, what am I going to do? But one of the fun things was, I don't know if you've seen it. So here's the cover. So this cover shot is actually a photo I took when I was in Istanbul. And so I knew that I wanted to use something a little different as far as location and things. And that's what I do a lot of times when I travel. I don't know what I'm going to use until I get into the story. And that was just, I'd had a mention of Turkey in the first book, and I think it'd probably been because I'd been there recently, and I was like, oh, you know what, I'm just going to use this. So, it ends up being they think it's a serial killer, and then they're like, is it really a serial killer who'd killed this? It was an American journalist who died in Istanbul, and it's just really these 2 characters trying to figure out the journey. But it's fun having 2 people working together who are not, they normally wouldn't. You normally wouldn't have a military aide in an investigative role, and you normally, FBI behavioral analysts normally don't do that either. They're giving you the heart of what might be helpful, but they're not actually on boots on ground. So.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You use your own picture for your cover. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What is that process like? I never talked to an author who has used their own picture for the book cover.
So, and it was totally the publisher's decision, but the original cover was a dark. They recolored it into a more of the golden look. Originally, it was more of a darker color, but when I took the photo, I'm like, oh my gosh, this could be the cover of a suspense novel. I'm like, it just looked creepy and everything. And so I showed it to one of the project managers, and she's like, oh my gosh, you're right. That you need to send that to me. And so I sent it to her. And when they went to do the graphic artists, they were just given that photo saying, hey, if you can make it work, see what you can do with this. And that's what they did. So they put the 2 people on the cover. They superimposed those, but the original photo was the one I'd taken when I was it's in the Basilica Cistern in Istanbul.
Wow, that's wild. It's exciting to see the cover of your own book for the first time, but I can't imagine that plus being your picture. Do you ever imagine when you were snapping that picture? That would,
Not at all. My husband was an amateur photographer for a while, and his theory is if you take 1,000 photos, one of them will be good. And I've kind of followed that rule of like, all right, just take a ton, and then maybe something will be a good one. But yeah, I still can't believe that one just framed so perfectly.
So yeah, and that's I was going to ask about that too, because the international plays a big role, obviously, with these type of books. How do you research that? Do you usually use countries that you've visited before, or can you tell us your research process on that?
I mean, I've done both. I think the first time I set a book in Paris, I had never been there, and I remember somebody saying like, "Oh, I didn't realize you'd been in Paris," and they're like, "Actually, I haven't." So I've had a few times where I just, you get on Google Earth, you talk to people who've been there, but it's mostly trying to get beyond what the tourist is going to see. Usually when I travel abroad, I try to go in and out of places in a different method, like transportation methods. So for example, my first time into Paris, I took the train, and then I ended up flying out of there. When I went into Tallinn in Estonia, I think I flew into Tallinn, but then I took the ferry into Helsinki. Going into Riga, I took the bus, going in from Vilnius. So it's like I do different things, but I try to travel the way more locals would, so that it's not uncommon for me to be the only American on whatever transportation I'm on. So and then it's just a matter of I try to dress in a way that I would look European, which isn't that hard, quite honestly, because I tend to like my clothes from there anyway. But yeah, it's mostly just you don't know what you're going to use, but being able to breathe the air, smell the scents, and taste the food, all of those kind of things, they really do fall into adding more authenticity into the work.
I say in your book too, like Luke Steele struggles with grief and self-doubt in this book. And so it's kind of different from usually when you're reading these type of books. They're usually like superhuman. Is that important for you to show vulnerability when you're writing these protagonists?
I mean, I think it's anytime you give that extra depth to a character, I think it's easier for the readers to relate. Because yeah, you're right. A lot of these characters are more of the superhuman type. They might have wounds, but usually the wound has already been established before the book starts. And I kind of wanted to take a different approach. So a lot of the trauma that Luke is dealing with, that even Amberlin's dealing with, some of those occurred in the first book, so that people can actually see those happen instead of just hearing about what those challenges are. So, and honestly, one of the things that I have received from some of the early reviewers is that they appreciate kind of an authentic look at the PTSD kind of scenarios, because it's real life. A lot of people do deal with it, but I try not to go too dark into it, so that you want to have hope at the end of the tunnel.
And same thing with the subject matter, because you're dealing with some pretty big threats here, assassinations and nuclear threats. How does that? Do you do a lot of research for that too? Because I mean,
I think a lot of it's more of a write what you know kind of thing. And so, and part of it, I have to have things that are a little bit not too realistic, just because the CIA does clear my books. So I have to make sure that nothing's too on point. But, it's mostly, you start with the question, what if? What if something like, what scary thing could happen that I might want to throw into a book and torment my characters with? And that's kind of what happens.
I was also wondering too, because I saw that you've also written romance novels too. So what's the difference with the two genres? Do you approach them the same way? I'm just kind of curious about that, because they're so different.
They are very different, and I will say almost every time I write a romance novel, inevitably somebody's like, don't forget, this is not a suspense. You need to actually, I have to spend more time in the characters' heads, and the pacing is a lot different. So, and I would say most of my romance novels, they do typically have a sports theme. So there's still some type of a suspense element. It's just in a different way. It's, you're still working toward a goal. So those tend to be a little bit easier for me, but trying to write a straight romance is always, it's a little bit like eating candy after dinner. Like it's a treat. It's something different from my normal, but after a while I'm like, okay, yeah, I can't have too much of this because it's hard. It's hard to switch gears. So
Yeah, you want to go back to killing people, right?
I know I kill people for a living. That's kind of what I do.
Do you write the romance under your name, or is it under
Yeah.
a name? Oh, do you ever get confusion or cross confusion?
It's funny. Most of the people who've been loyal fans, they're like, it doesn't matter what you write, we'll read it. And I was
That's
like,
great.
I love you guys so much. What do I say?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great compliment.
Yeah.
I was wondering now too about getting into a little bit about your writing process. Also, like I know this gets asked all the time, but we're all curious. So are you a plotter? Do you like just start writing and figure the story as you go?
So I am definitely a fingers on keyboard kind of girl. Like plot is a 4-letter word that is not one I use often. But yeah, I'm probably the most extreme as far as a discovery writer, pantser, however you want to term it, of anyone you'll find, because I really don't know anything about my story when I start. I typically try to have a character name, and I usually will have at least a base setting of where I'm starting the story, and that's about as far as I know when I go.
Oh, that's great. Have you ever like I imagine the challenges with that is the dreaded writing yourself into a corner. Has that ever happened to you, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I've only had it happen one time really bad, and it was going into a swim season. I had somebody like literally was taken hostage. I'm like, oh my gosh, this bad guy is so good. How is she ever going to get out of the situation? And that poor character sat there for 4 months all through swim season. I could not figure out what was going to happen. I finally, after state, sat down and said, okay, that's it. She's got to get out of this situation. So, I mean, it's just, I don't normally write myself into corners. It's not terribly common. Sometimes I'll find I took a wrong turn, but it's usually not more than a few hundred words worth of it. But yeah, I'm fortunate. I think, for writers, it's really important to just follow whatever process works best for you, because for me, it's a natural, it's kind of like watching a movie. And, as viewers, we're watching things happen thinking, okay, these are the options of what could happen next. And so as a writer, I'm doing the same thing. I get to a point, I'm like, okay, I've got these 3 options. What should happen? And then if I can find a 4th one that everyone doesn't expect, fantastic. But sometimes I'll take one of the 3 and then throw another turn in, toward the end. But I just never know what I'm going to do. But wrong turns are not too frequent, thankfully.
Well, 45 books, so it's obviously that process is working for you very well. So
Yeah.
I was also curious now about your writing habits. Do you write every day? And if so, do you like set word counts to keep yourself on track?
Yeah. So the ideal is, typically I try to get about 2,000 words a day. Sometimes I'll drop it to 1,500. Sometimes I'm on deadline. It'll be a bit more than that. But really, when everything's going well, my favorite place to write is I typically write on my treadmill, like just walking on my treadmill. And then I also have like an exercise bike that has a desk on it. And so if I can do those 2 things, usually I can get, 1,000 to 1,500 words in a couple of hours. And then, of course, I'll probably fight for the next 5 hours to find the next 500 words or whatever. But yeah, so that's kind of, and I write, ideally, I typically try to do, Monday through Saturday. So if I'm having a really great week, Saturday turns into a half day. If it's been a really rough week, I'll go until midnight. So just depends on the week.
And what do you use to write? Do you use Word or Scrivener or something else?
So I originally draft in Scrivener. I have like one of those old AlphaSmart Neo word processors.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I normally like to draft on. I'm so much more efficient because I can't like go check my email or things like that. I can't be looking at what else is on the page. I just writing. And then I dump that into Scrivener. And then once I get through that first draft where I'm pretty sure that the structure is correct, then I dump everything into Word and I work my edits in Word. So it's a little of everything. But yeah. I love the Scrivener aspect because you can move the files. Like I don't always write in order. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'm like, oh, here's an upcoming scene. I know this is going to happen, but I don't know when. And so being able to move things around is way easier in Scrivener.
Yeah, I like that alpha tablet is kind of cool too. When you plug it in, you see the words flying into the.
Oh yeah. Like,
Like,
oh, man, I wish I could type this fast.
yeah. So that's interesting. So, and also another question I've been asking lately because I started wondering about these for the writers. Now, do you have music on? Do you need silence when you're writing?
I don't write to music typically, but I don't need silence either. Like I'm normally in my down on my treadmill. I mean, if I typically don't like to hear like TV or anything in the background because that could be distracting. But you know, like I said, I live near Quantico, so it's not uncommon where I have sound effects, where I can hear the automatic weapons going off or the ordnance, target practice. And Marine One flies over me pretty regularly, which is the helicopter that takes the president to and from on the short distances. So anyway, I am very comfortable with background noise, but usually it's to my benefit.
Yeah, that's great. And I discovered that last year when I was visiting in DC and I was at a coffee shop and the motorcades. I'm like, how do they get used to this every day? It was like the first time was kind of cool. Then after like 10 times, I'm like, okay, this is kind of weird. Like
Yeah.
like a motorcade was going by.
Oh yeah. Yep. It happens. And in fact, first time I took one of my young cousins to the White House, or we were just walking around DC, and we were coming up to where the motorcade would come out, and I could see that the movement of the Secret Service agents. And so I told my niece or my cousin, I was like, hey, either we need to cross this area right now quickly, or else we're going to be stuck here for the next 10 minutes. And she looked at me like, what? And I said, just which one do you want to do? You want to be on this side or that side? And she's like, okay, that side. And the Secret Service agents were looking at me like, how do you know? I'm like, dude, I'm a local. Like, like, of course I know. So anyway, he just kind of laughed, but.
I was curious to, with your background as a swimming coach, I have to ask because you've been able to dip your experiences in the CIA. What about as a swimming coach? Have you been able to use any of that in any of your books?
Oh yeah, like I have a series that was Navy SEALs, so I did a lot with that. But special ops have been very frequently would visit my pool and look for, hey, do you have anybody that you could send our way? And I did end up having one young man who went for pre-buds, and I'm not sure. I know he ended up having to switch out for an early injury, but I was like, most of my guys, they're going to be officer bound if they're going military. These are like really, really bright young men and women, and a lot of times they're looking for the intelligence, but people who maybe are more interested in enlisting rather than doing the college route first. So, but yeah, I've used a lot. I've actually had a couple of my, I've had swimming as a background in a couple of books. So it's been fun. Use a lot of those characters. And I also had my swimmers, I'd be like, hey guys, I need a main character. And, like one girl, her name is Hadley, and she's like, oh, you can use mine. I'm like, do you want me to use your first name or last name? She goes, you can use both. I'm like, great. And so she was my character. And so it was fun. They'd help me choose covers, and when they'd give me like narrow down covers for my publisher and stuff. So it's been a lot of fun.
I'm also curious too. Before you started writing thrillers yourself, were you a fan of the genre as a reader?
I was like, I've always read. I'm really, really eclectic. It's like I would read just about anything. I mean, Sandra Brown, Nora Roberts were probably two that I read the most. But then, you'd have, the typical of like Tom Clancy and, Vince Flynn, Clive Cussler. I mean, a lot of those. What I would do though is David Baldacci and John Grisham were others. But a lot of those I would read, like, instead of reading everything by one author, I would read one by an author and read one by a different author. And I would just kind of keep rotating through. But I think that was really, really great for me because it helped me find my own voice when I started writing. I never felt like I was trying to imitate somebody else. So, but yes, I definitely enjoyed the genre. And it's been fun seeing some of those names, pop into different conferences I go to and things like that.
Yeah, and I said on your website, you've actually spoken at it's a BoucherCon and
VoucherCon,
yeah,
yeah.
Thriller Fest, Killer Nashville. Do you enjoy that, connecting with other writers and readers at conferences? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, I do. I think that's one of the best parts of being an author is connecting with other authors and then also connecting with the readers. But one thing I will say about the thriller community is I have found it to be very, very supportive. I mean, people are just, I mean, it's fun that you have a lot of people who have similar backgrounds to where I'm coming from, you know, that either have been in special ops or military service, the intelligence community, things like that. But also just, I mean, I remember at BoucherCon last year, Brad Thor had stopped me and was like, "Hey, are you Traci Abramson?" And I was like, "Yes." And he's introduced himself, and I was like, "Okay, this can I just tell you this is a surreal moment that you even know that I exist, much less who I am." And but Brad's great about cultivating those friendships with people who is like, okay, this is an area he's never worked in, but maybe things that could, people who might be able to help him out in the in the future. But he's also been very willing to lend a hand. I mean, like he was kind enough to blurb victim number 8 and do an endorsement for that. But I find that across the board, everyone is just so kind and so helpful.
Yeah, it's gonna be wild when you see a blurb from someone like Brad Thor, or it's gonna be a little surreal, huh?
Yeah, well, and Alex Finley was another one who did one, and Alex, he'd been in, I'd gone in and done a master class with him, and he's just a great guy. So but anyway, and then Jack Stewart was one I'd met him before he even got published, so he was another one who did a blurb, and then Luke Beneke I'd met because his name's Luke, and I was like, okay, you have to, we need to have you blurb one of the Luke books. So it's just, these guys they're all just so much fun. So.
And do you have plans to for any more Luke Steele novels? What's in the horizon for you?
I actually just today got the edit back for the third one, so I'll be working on that. But the plan is I'll go at least 4, and then depending on how it's going, I do have an idea of how I could pivot the series to kind of continue it. And they'll decide if they want me to do that or work on, create a different series. So
Are you focusing on that now, or are you also still writing romance? Or
right now, I'm mostly just writing the suspense because I have so many that are on the docket. So yeah, I think I have 5. Let's see, 2026. I think I have 4 releases. Yeah, 4 releases next year, including plus a couple of paperback releases next year.
Wow.
And then I think the same thing will happen in 2027. So yeah, I have to finish up all of the suspense books I have under contract, and then I can see if I get kind of take a little detour for a break or not.
Yeah, a little breather.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now, final question that I always ask my guests is, and since you speak at conferences, this is awesome. Any advice for aspiring thriller writers that are listening to this show?
So, I mean, honestly, the biggest thing that helped me when I started out was finding somebody who gave me really good, honest feedback. I know International Thriller Writers, ITW, has a critique program called Thrillertique, where you can they basically have critique groups that are set up, and people can get on the wait list for that. But whether it's something like that or through a local library or even just a trusted, it can be a trusted friend or family member, but it has to be somebody who's not going to just say how fabulous it is. They need to actually give you constructive criticism. But it's really helpful because when you do get that criticism later from an editor or somebody in the professional realm, you've already started learning how to implement that. And then, of course, the other thing would be going to those types of conferences, Thriller Fest and BoucherCon, Killer Nashville, any of those. It can really help you not only to advance your technique and your craft, but also to start making some of those connections with other people in the industry.
All right, great advice. So before we go, can you share with listeners where they can find you online to learn more about your books?
So it's just TraciAbramson.com. It's TraciAbramson. And then, of course, I'm same thing at Instagram. That's usually where you'll find what's happening next.
Traci, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure talking with you.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Meet the Thriller Author, hosted by Alan Peterson. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. It helps other thriller fans discover the show. You can find all past episodes, show notes, and author interviews at thrillerauthors.com, including conversations with icons like Dean Koontz, Frida McFadden, and Lee Child. And if you're looking for your next gripping read, check out Alan's own psychological thrillers and crime fiction novels at thrillingreads.com/books. Until next time, stay safe, keep reading, and keep the thrills coming.